A look into attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, by Andrew Kelly. The definition that is listed is provided by the American Psychiatric Association and can be found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders from the 2000 edition. However, as the APA updates the DSM, the definition can somewhat change, but relatively remains the same. The history of ADHD begins with a British pediatrician, Sir George Still, in 1902. He first identified some children as having an abnormal defect of moral control. Later, in 1936, Dr. Charles Bradley finds benzodrine, which helps patients' behavior and performance in school. In 1955, the FDA approves Ritalin, which is a known drug for ADHD. The DSM recognizes ADHD in 1968, which was then known as hyperkinetic impulsive disorder, for the first time. In 1980, a new edition of the DSM is introduced, which changes the name of the hyperkinetic impulsive disorder to attention deficit disorder, ADD. DSM later changes the name in 1987 to ADHD, which we currently know it as today. In the 1990s, there's a significant climb in the numbers of individuals with ADHD. There's three factors that contribute to this. One, doctors are able to diagnose ADHD more efficiently. Two, parents are more aware of the symptoms, therefore taking them to see doctors. And three, more children are developing ADHD, which leads us to today, where we're still researching causes and possible treatments for people with ADHD. Characteristics, and within characteristics, we have several different things we'll be discussing. The first of which is cognitive. And within cognitive, we have four different aspects. First is your working memory. Students with ADHD have poor working memory, typically, which allows them to be forgetful and maybe not remember directions and instructions. Secondly, there is self-directed speech, which allows you to stay focused and on task. They tend to not have the greatest self-directed speech. That's why they tend to be off task. Third is control of emotion and motivation, which can affect the student's ability to complete tedious tasks. Lastly, they have reconstitution, which interferes with the student's ability to see how certain tasks are similar and those skills can be transferred to the other task. The academic characteristics are quite interesting because they vary greatly. In one case, we have students with ADHD who are on the gifted end of these things, and they do extremely well in school and they challenge themselves with rigorous courses. Then we have students in the middle ground who don't really need any academic support and just take classes as need be to graduate high school or whatever they're in. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, we have students who need effective interventions in order to be academically successful. So you can see that there's no clear-cut way to define how a student with ADHD is going to do academically. You just have to go case by case and develop a plan in which that student will be successful. For social characteristics, this is an interesting one as well, because in some cases, these students with ADHD find themselves being bullied. In other cases, they will say that they are the bully. This also can lead to why it's difficult for students with ADHD to develop and maintain friendships. For emotional characteristics, there's no real evidence out there to say whether ADHD affects a student's emotions. It's inconclusive to say whether their self-esteem is lowered or raised due to this disorder. For behavioral characteristics, the frequency and the severity of these characteristics will vary depending upon student to student. But some of the things that you may come in contact with or see within your classroom are students don't necessarily pay attention to details or directions. They may turn in incomplete assignments or have many missing assignments. They may avoid tedious tasks or tasks that would take a long time to accomplish. Uh, they may have difficulty working in groups due to what we talked about with their social aspect, social characteristics. As for prevalence, as we see here, ADHD is the most common behavioral disorder in children, and it affects between 5% to 10% of school age children. It was thought ADHD disappears into adulthood, but roughly 5% of adults have ADHD. Also, research is not conclusive, but it is believed boys are identified with ADHD more often than girls. As for the way that students receive instruction, students with ADHD are in the general education classrooms because they tend to be successful here. In classes, collaborations takes place between the SPED teacher and the general education teacher so that the general education teacher can be equipped with strategies to help make ADHD students successful. So, in short, for the most part, you will find students with ADHD within the gen ed classroom. So, for research-based instructional strategies here, we have the token economy. In the token economy, we have 5 different phases that we kind of go through. First is we clearly define the behavior in measurable terms. So this is the behavior that we want to get rid of. Next, we collect baseline data about how many times this behavior occurs. Following that, we discuss with the student the behavior and what we would like to see instead and how often it is taking place. Then we identify reinforcement that can be earned. So the student will look to lessen the frequency of this behavior, and in doing so, he's working towards receiving something of interest to him, whether it's extra time at recess, whether it's extra time to use a computer, whatever it may be. And then lastly, as he demonstrates that the frequency is diminishing, then we start phasing it out accordingly so that hopefully the behavior is not as prevalent and maybe no longer there within the classroom. For the next part, we look at, for instance, research papers, which are a very lengthy process. Rather than assigning a research paper and saying this is due in a month or 2 months' time, we look to set up deadlines for each segment so that a student can keep up and stay organized. So the key here is to break up lengthy assignments into segments and parts that have deadlines and that maybe are even graded as well so the student knows how they are doing along the way. And this is in goal to that they'll be able to turn in the lengthy project, the lengthy research paper at the end. Impacts on the family. As you can see, I just put 2 things here: exhausting and stressful. This doesn't necessarily mean this is the case for all families and all parents. Once again, ADHD varies greatly, so we take it by case by case. But for instance, students with ADHD may not sleep as long or as often as their peers. Students may also seem to be nonstop, and with this also be unfocused at times. Also, as the children get older, the parents have to start to deal with whether they want to medicate their child or not. So that's going to be, once again, case by case. Some parents don't feel comfortable with medications, others do. The child may not feel comfortable with the medication, so it just varies greatly on whether that happens or not, which can lead to a stressful household once again. And you can see this is my work site.